Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 93. I almost got that wrong. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Today's guest, this is going to be a fun one for me. I know the name, I know the face just from being a character in the city for a lot of years. So please go ahead, name and who you are.
My name is Todd Hirsch, and I have lived and worked in Calgary for about just over 34 years, and super happy to be here. It's exciting.
Our good friend Jesse set this up, so quick little shout out for making this intro. The cool thing about the show is I get to sit down with really cool Calgarians, and usually it's like somebody says, "Oh, you need to talk to this person. You got to have this person on." So after I had Jesse on the show, he was like, "You need to talk to Todd."
Well, and I'll give you some good recommendations of other people. So the chain keeps going.
That's it, which is really cool. So the gist of the show, I like the guests to kind of go back and tell their story. And some guests go back to different ages. Some people go back to where they grew up, how they grew up, you know, their influences growing up, how their parents were involved in their life, and then we just kind of weave our way to where you are today. So it's cool for me to ride shotgun just like firsthand on these stories because I do zero research. I know nothing about your past. So it's just kind of how it's the reason the show is just a little unique. So so take it back as far as you want to go.
Well, I don't really have, when you think about people with these amazing stories and, you know, these like terribly tragic upbringings, and my story is actually pretty vanilla, pretty bland, but it's a story nonetheless. I was born and raised in Edmonton, and I still cheer for the Oilers, I gotta say, although shout out to the Flames. I'll always cheer for the Flames if they're in the playoffs, but I am an Oilers fan. Grew up in Edmonton, finished university in Edmonton in 1989. And I was one of these, you know, I don't know, some of the listeners might remember the rivalry between the two cities back in the 80s.
Well, I was just going to ask you, because if you grew up as an Oilers fan in the heyday in the 80s, you saw a lot of cups.
A lot of cups,
Yeah. Like City of Champions.
I physically didn't get to go to the game, but I think the Oilers won 4 Stanley Cups. Then I moved to Calgary in 1989, and 2 weeks later, Calgary won the Stanley Cup. So for a while, I kind of thought it had more to do with me.
The lucky charm.
And the cup will just follow wherever I am. But grew up in Edmonton. Then I like to describe myself as, you know, having accidentally moved to Calgary because it really was an accident. I had left the U of A. I had finished my undergrad in economics. I had applied and was accepted for my master's at McGill in Montreal. But in the summer of 1989, I had a summer job opportunity in Calgary with a research organization, a not-for-profit, nonpartisan called the Canada West Foundation, which is still operating. It's doing great. But this was the first real research job I had as a young economist. Literally the summer previous, summer of 1987, or 88, I guess it was, my summer job in Edmonton was I worked at 7-Eleven on Argyle Road. The 80s, you know, some of the listeners are like me, are old enough to remember, the 80s were way worse for jobs. We've never seen in this province, not even in COVID, have we seen anything as bad as the 80s, 12% unemployment. So it was tough to get a good summer job. I went from 7-Eleven, and then the summer of 1989, I had a chance for a research summer internship here in Calgary. And my reaction was, Calgary. I hate Calgary. But I had to go, you know, to get this job, the experience. So I thought, well, I'll plug my nose. How bad could it be? I'll go for 4 months. And 34 years later, I've never left. Because I found out, actually, this city is fantastic, even in 1989. And it is not, you know, today Calgary is a much more vibrant city, a lot more going on, as most cities are. But, you know, in 1989, it was still a really appealing, really attractive city. I delayed doing my master's degree a year, kept working here in Calgary that year. And then I made some connections at the University of Calgary and ended up staying and doing my master's here at UCalgary. So like I said, I've never left, never physically left living in any other city than Calgary. So
was your, like growing up, was your family, was there a long line of like Edmontonians, just like generations of like growing up in Edmonton, and like so this move was a thing?
Pretty much, yeah. My mom grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan, but she moved to Alberta to go to college in after she had finished high school. My dad was born and raised just outside of Camrose, Alberta. So I guess, and on my dad's side, they'd go back in Alberta to maybe 3 generations, back to the early 1900s, some of the original pioneers. So mostly around Edmonton, yeah. But for me to move, I was also the first person in my family, extended family, cousins to even go to a university.
No way.
So I don't come from a background of scholars necessarily, and that's okay.
Yep.
But it was a little bit of a departure for my family to go to university at all, and then to move cities and then do a master's degree. Like, I could have been an alien, for what they were used to.
Why is that? Why do you think? Was it just they were just in certain career or different jobs or things?
Different jobs, yeah. My father, he grew up in that in the 50s when what you did, well, you're 17 years old, you finished high school. Well, now you get a job. And he got a job in Camrose at a grocery store, pushing a broom at the IGA or Tomboy store or whatever grocery store it was. Probably made 50 cents an hour. But in that day and age, you work hard and you get promoted, and 37 years later, he retired in senior management with Canada Safeway. So he had this 37-year-long career in retail grocery, never having gone to university. I think somewhere along the line, they maybe made him take some correspondence business classes, so he could actually manage a store and sort of understand the business of it. But, and my mom, she was a homemaker. She raised a family, and she didn't go to university. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just a different kind of world. Yep. My sister and my younger brother, they took a different path too. They're doing great. But my path was, I was really good at school.
You were?
Yeah,
like just
I was
naturally?
great at school.
Elementary, junior high school? Just like...
Yeah, and in fact, I don't even remember, I was thinking about this the other day in high school. I went to high school in Edmonton. I don't remember doing any homework or even studying. Now, I must have. That's a long time ago, but I don't remember doing any of it. School was never hard for me, and I was also working part-time while I was in high school and involved in a bunch of things. Yep. But I did really, really well in school. It just seemed super easy, and I was super engaged and interested in school. I think I graduated. You had to get 100 credits.
Yep.
I don't know if they still have the same
still
thing.
the same thing.
Still the same thing. Yep. I had 137 credits.
Oh, wow.
Just because I liked the classes. I didn't take any spares. I was that nerderific. Terrible at sports. They would not let me. But I was on the chess club. That's the level of nerdiness just keeps getting deeper. But I was in chess club. And chess was not cool until 2021 or whenever the Queen's Gambit came out. Finally, chess is cool. 30 years too late for me.
You're a little ahead.
I was ahead of it. And I still love chess.
The economics play, like coming out of high school, did you know that was your path?
No. I did have a social studies teacher in high school, though, and his name was Mr. Webb. And he died, tragically, of a heart attack a couple years after I left high school. But Mr. Webb, in my social studies 10 or social studies 30 or whatever it was, he recognized, I'd be asking a lot of questions in class, and he would stay with me after class, and he would answer all these questions, and he'd get into the weeds a little bit more. And, as a kid, as a 15-year-old high school student, I don't think I really appreciated fully what he was doing for me. I appreciate it now. I wish the man was alive that I could, thank him, because that extra time he took with me as a teacher, I think, created sparks in me, sparks of curiosity. Now, I didn't start university as an econ major. In fact, I started as a math major. Yeah, I was in the Faculty of Science at the U of A, and the only reason I took math, it was no other reason than, well, that was my best grade in high school, so I guess I'm going to go into math. So I find myself in the math department, and in my second year of math, I realized I suck at math. I was not doing well. I looked around me at the classroom, and everyone else really seemed to be getting this intermediate calculus, and I just felt like, no, none of this is making sense anymore. I didn't like it. I was, having a bit of an existential, what do I do? But then fortuitously, I got this letter in the mail from the Department of Economics at the U of A. And this is the way, it doesn't work this way anymore. This is 1985. I got a letter in the post at home, and it said, "Dear Todd Hirsch," they said, "we noticed that," and I was taking, in addition to my math courses, I was taking an intro econ course, and I was acing it. It was getting like the best marks. And they invited me to join the honors program at the U of A for undergrads. And you get office space, you get a little bit of what they called a teacher assistant thing. So you had to mark some undergrad exams, and you got paid a little bit of money, and you were in the honors program with like 10 other students. Would you like to do this? I'm like, yes, I would like to do this because this math thing is not working out. So then I switched majors from Faculty of Science to Faculty of Arts, which alarmed my father at the time because he thought it was going to be drawing and painting. And no disrespect to fine arts, the people who actually do draw and paint. But when I switched from Faculty of Science to Faculty of Arts, my father was like, "Oh, so you're going to be like drawing?" And he was like really let down. So I had to explain to him, it's not just drawing.
What do you think that was? Why do you think he, because you were the first?
Yeah.
You were just kind of like, just paving the path and just...
And he had never heard of he had never even set foot at the U of A campus. Why would he? I mean, it just seemed, again, it seemed like another planet to him and my family growing up.
Yep.
There was this idea that there was something called a university somewhere in Edmonton, but, it was just outside of their... So in my second or third year, it was actually adorable because my dad, he was curious about this and he was interested in what I was doing. So he asked if he could come to school with me one day to university.
Awesome.
Now, what a difference a few years makes, because could you imagine in grade 10, dad's going to follow you around? You would be mortified. But by my third year of university, I thought, this is adorable. Like, what a nice thing. He wants to spend time with me. He wants to connect with me. He wants to understand my world a little bit. So he followed me around to all the lecture theaters and, where I would have lunch at the U of A, because it was one of those campuses where you kind of go for the whole day.
Yep.
So he followed me around and learned a little bit about what university life is all about, but it was brand new to him.
That's a cool experience.
It was really cool. Yeah, it was one of my best memories actually I have of my dad. He passed away in 2014. But, it was a really sweet thing that he just wanted to connect with me, understand what the Faculty of Arts is all about.
Yeah, that'd be...
If it's not drawing, what possibly could it be?
What is he doing?
What is he doing there? I need to find out.
So that was your second and third year?
Second or third year, one of those, yeah.
Yep. So then when it starts, then where are you at?
Pardon me?
Then are you finishing? You still got to finish?
Oh, yeah. So I finished university, graduated with... now, in university...
Are you working, by the way, in university?
Yes. I worked 2 days a week, Saturday and maybe like a Thursday night, at a Safeway store, bringing in the shopping carts when they used to have, these students who would, bring in the carts and wrap the groceries in the paper bags. Like
I did all that, too.
You did all that, too? Yeah. It seems like a long time ago that they...
It's really funny because my mom she worked at the IGA up in Strathcona.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to get this wrong, but 28 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So as you're telling this story, I'm thinking
the
about
grocery retail world is a little familiar to you.
Totally.
And you worked at a grocery store too?
Yeah. So I worked at the Safeway in West Hills.
Okay.
Yeah. In the mid 90s.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So yeah, so as you're kind of recollecting, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is like
grocery stores. Yeah, that was a lot of my upbringing, and then of course 7-Eleven, which is sort of one foot removed from retail grocery.
Totally. It's all tied together.
It's all tied together.
Yep. So keep going.
Yeah, so I finished my degree in 1989. Now I was saying in high school I didn't have to really try very hard. At the U of A I had to try pretty hard. I was working. I had to study. Like it was difficult work, So I remember having to actually learn how to study and, but I did well. I finished with an honors degree in 89 and decided that I wanted to go on and do a master's degree. And then, I sort of described it. I ended up here in Calgary. I did a master's, and I guess it was the school year of 90-91. And that just about took the life out of me because it was for me, it was really, really difficult. I had kind of reached intellectually as far as I'm going to go. But it was tough. And I talked about how, I transferred out of the Faculty of Science and got out of math and went into economics. But the math comes back to haunt you in a big, big way. There is a lot of math. So I still had to kind of learn the math. But while I was in my undergrad and doing my graduate work, the math now seemed to have a reason. This is why we're doing the math. Back when I was in the Faculty of Math or the math department, it just seemed people are doing math just to do math. Now in economics, it felt like we're doing it to try to solve some problems or to answer some social questions about the economy. How does the economy work? How do the labor markets work? Now I have some thoughts today looking back at all that math and all the modeling we did in the 80s and 90s. But it felt more at home to me to be in economics than just in the Department of Mathematics.
So after you finished school, this is like 91, 92?
91, and then I wrote a thesis. So I actually didn't graduate, and then I started working back at the Canada West Foundation full-time as a research assistant while I was writing my thesis. That's a bad idea.
Full-time and writing a thesis.
Full-time and writing my thesis. And just, tip to the wise, any students out there who are thinking of doing this, it's a bad idea. Because I thought, this is going to be simple. I'll work all day, and then in the evenings, I'll work on my thesis. And then it got to be, weekends I'll work on. And then it was, rainy weekends I'll work on my thesis. And then, predictably, this dragged on and on for like 18 months or 2 years, or I think it was almost 2 years. And then eventually I said, I've got to get this done. So finished the thesis, graduated finally with my master's in March of 1993. So just a little over 30 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just to give you some context, I graduated high school in 94.
At least you were alive. I mean, I talked to people, they weren't even alive in 1994, a lot of them.
This job, was it, did they just hire you from being an intern, like summer student, just to they saw that?
I had applied. They had the Canada West Foundation back in the day. They'd usually hire like 2 or 3 summer students every year. And I had applied at the summer of 88, and I didn't get it. But I applied again in the summer of 1989, got the summer job. And then they said at the end of the summer, they said, we really actually like you. We like the work you're doing.
Yep.
If you're interested, we could keep you on like 2 days a week. While I was, doing my graduate work, and I kind of liked the idea of that. And then once all the coursework and everything finished, then I resumed working full time there, and they just kind of kept me on. I think I got $12 an hour or something like that. But again, this is the dark ages, right?
For sure.
They probably paid me in money, like in cash. I can't even remember, but I thought it was pretty good. I finished my master's degree, and now I'm working in my field. I was actually doing sort of economic research. Now, at the time, economic research really amounted to doing a lot of photocopying for my bosses. They needed these reports, and can you photocopy this because that's just what we did in 1993. So it's a lot of that. But I got some really good experience actually working on writing some research reports. At the time, free trade was a big economic and sort of social or public policy issue. So I worked on a few reports that Canada West Foundation did around free trade with the U.S. and then extending it to free trade with Mexico. So I got to work on some really interesting, to me, that were interesting projects related to economics.
Where was your kind of peer group? Were you doing something like wildly different than most of your friends or students?
That's a good question. Coming out of the U of A, most of my peers were at university with me. And then, they weren't all economists. They went off and sort of did different things.
Yep.
But the group of friends that I formed here in Calgary, a lot of them were people I did work with. And we formed, because at the time, Canada West, there was probably 20 people that worked there, and there were quite a few young people. They had a good history of hiring, students or recent grads. So a lot of us were pretty young, and we just kind of formed friendships and, started hanging around a lot. And that was a lot of my peer group, a lot of the people that I worked with.
So what starts happening? So how long are you there? How long you at this job?
Well,
and you get your master's.
I got my master's. So in 1997, I made a terrible mistake because I was still making, I think I was making like $22,000 a year in 1997. Even that was really low. And I had a master's degree, and I had already worked there for like 4 years. So I made the foolish mistake of doing some market research, and I, found it online or wherever it would have been at the time. And here's, what a master's degree or somebody with a master's degree and this much experience, here's how much they would, be able to make in the market. And I found most economists were making about $45,000 or $50,000 a year. And I'm like, so I prepared all this research, and I set up a meeting with my boss at the time, and I came in and presented this, and I said, I think, we need to talk about a salary adjustment or some, increase in pay. I'm way below where I, kind of should be. And he goes, you are absolutely right. And that's why I'm laying you off and getting rid of you, because you do deserve more, but I don't have any more to pay you. So we're going to wind this down and,
Good luck.
Good luck. And I'm like, oh no, this is not the way this conversation was supposed to go. Because I liked my job.
You didn't play that scenario out?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I thought, well, he's only going to say yes or no. He's not going to lay me off, but he did. It was the worst. But at the same time, it was the best thing that had happened to me, because proverbially, he was kicking me out of the nest. He was a great guy, David Elton, he was the president. And the way he wanted to run it, and it's perfectly fine, it was a not-for-profit. They didn't have unlimited money. But he wanted to keep sort of a roster of inexperienced students or recent grads to get them some experience, but not pay them very much, because he couldn't afford to pay them much. But you kind of outgrow the position, and then you sort of leave the nest. And I was sort of failing to launch. So he said, we're going to, So I thought, this is terrible. I've lost my job. I don't have a job. But it all worked out, because then I got a job at Canadian Pacific Railway, which had recently moved from Montreal to Calgary. So this would have been 1997. My pay went from $22,000 a year to $50,000 a year. I thought, I just about lost my mind. Yeah. I thought, I have hit the jackpot. I'm working for this big blue chip storied Canadian company, the Canadian Pacific Railway. They're moving their headquarters to Calgary. I doubled my salary. This is incredible. And I was a business analyst, so I was doing some, kind of economic stuff and really kind of liked the team I worked with. They were all these displaced Montrealers. They were so much fun. But they had no idea what had hit them. They arrived, they left their home in Montreal. All right, allons-y, let's go to Calgary. What could go wrong? And I had a great time sort of educating them what Calgary's all about. They said, oh, we like Calgary, but we can't find any good restaurants. We drive up and down McLeod Trail, and we can't find any. I said, well, you got to get off McLeod Trail. So I set up this Tuesday night dinner club with some of the Montrealers, and got to be a bit of an expensive hobby. But every Tuesday night, I would take them, first of all, somewhere for like cocktails or like a martini, and then we'd go for a proper dinner. And even in 1997 in Calgary, there was River Cafe, there was Mescalero, there were some good restaurants around. You just kind of had to know about them. Yep. And they didn't. So, and then we did a third one where we'd go for like a cappuccino or a dessert or something like that. So it was a bit of an education for these Montrealers that there's more to Calgary than Boston pizza, and no disrespect to Boston pizza, but they were having a hard time finding restaurants or things that they liked.
Did you as we before we started all this, we were talking about the original Mercury. You're like, oh, that place is awesome.
That's probably a place I would have taken them 100%.
When you moved to Calgary to dig into kind of the restaurant bar kind of scene in Calgary, did you prioritize that? Did you just did you migrate to cooler, like off the beaten path places?
I think so. I mean, originally I lived, I didn't live in inner city. Now I've lived in Beltline now for 22 years, and that's where I want to be. But originally, I lived in Acadia, and then I lived in Lakeview for a while. Yep. And so, and the friends I had, And we were actually pretty young at the time, but we weren't really too much into the bar or cocktail scene. That maybe came maybe a little bit later, late 90s. I remember Savoir Faire. I think I went there for New Year's Eve for dinner one. And I thought, this is the most beautiful food, because I kind of grew up going to Earl's and Boston Pizza.
Yep.
And then you get to Savoir Faire in 1997, and they're building these beautiful, I had never seen food prepared like that before. It was, for Calgary, one of the first kind of, higher end restaurants. And then Mescalero, a lot of good memories, because I thought, this is the coolest place. Their nachos are 3 colors of corn chips. Like to me, this is elevated dining. Yeah, like mind blowing, because I had never seen anything like that. But yeah, eventually I kind of drifted more into like what is the good restaurant and cocktail scene here.
Yep. So you're being the tour guide for the Montrealers.
Yeah, they loved it.
Yeah.
They also loved Stampede. They were very excited about Stampede because they were excited because they heard that people dressed up as cowboys, but they thought it was going to be like only certain people, sort of like mascots, I guess, like Bonhomme or something. And they would walk around downtown dressed as these cowboys. And I go, oh no, sweetie. Everyone dresses this way. And they just, they couldn't quite get it. But most of them, they really actually got right into it. They went out. I didn't even have proper cowboy boots, and I'm born and raised Alberta. I didn't have cowboy boots, but they bought boots, they bought hats, they got, kind of right into the spirit of it. Once they found out that it's not just mascots dressing like cowboys, it's all of us.
The whole city.
Yeah. So, and I haven't really, kept touch with too many of those people. Some of them actually, after a while, they ended up moving back to Montreal. I mean, I don't blame them. That was their home, and they liked their experience here. Some of them stayed. I know at least a couple are still here. But that was a really great couple of years, my first couple of years at CP Rail with the Montrealers. Loved it.
Sounds like a time.
And they'd give me good recommendations. When you go to Montreal, you got to go to all these restaurants and
the inn. Yeah. So how long were you at CP Rail?
I was there about 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, just over 5 years. Yeah.
And enjoyable. Were you looking elsewhere?
It was. Well, I liked my job there. I was doing well. It was a good job for me. Lots of great people. I learned a lot. But I was a victim of one of the corporate layoffs. So I was laid off again, probably around 2021, or pardon me, 2001, 2020.
I knew where you were going.
2001. I got laid off there just because they were still a bit management heavy at the time.
Yep.
Secretly, their move from Montreal to Calgary was intended to sort of attrition a lot of high-paid management, because if you don't come to Calgary, you don't get bought out. You're just quitting.
Yep.
But too many people came to Calgary because, the economy in Montreal at the time wasn't great. So they ended up still being pretty top-heavy. Even though I was a new hire, they phased my job out or my group. I can't remember the details, but anyway, it was. Do you remember? I was packaged out.
Do you remember what that felt like?
It felt horrible.
Yeah, and I was laid off from this place called Critical Mass.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember Critical Mass.
And it was I was young.
Horrible.
Yeah, I was early 20s.
Yeah.
And it rocked me. I was really confused.
It is a horrible, horrible thing, but it is one thing that I think everyone should experience once. Now, I wouldn't want to tell someone that the day they get laid off, they're going to punch me in the face because it does not feel at the time, this is the best thing that can happen to you.
Yep.
But both for me at the Canada West Foundation and for sure at CP, getting laid off in that moment was horrible, but it was the best thing that could have happened because I'm the type of personality that if things are comfortable, I probably won't, I'm learning how to do this, but I probably won't disrupt myself. So a layoff is a disruption.
Yep.
Everything you thought you knew about your job is now gone, and you have to reinvent yourself.
Yep.
And you learn when you go through a layoff, that you are much more than just that job. And this is what happens to and I don't know if it's worse for men or women. It's probably the same. But if you're in a job for a long, long time, your identity as a person sort of becomes fused with that job.
Yep.
And then if you're at that job for 30 years and then you get laid off, you are in free fall. Like, you don't know what to do.
Yep.
And at CP Rail, and again, no disrespect to the company, it was a great place, but it was one of those places I could see myself, if I just kept staying there, I would just eventually blend into the beige cubicle that I worked in.
Yep.
And I would lose myself. I would lose my identity. And it would just have become a job.
Yep.
in a beige cubicle.
And you could have gone down that path?
Oh, 100%. I don't think it's hard to, look back on it, but I wasn't looking to leave.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking to say, what's my next move? What's my next adventure? No, I like the nice regular paychecks of $50,000 a year. And I liked the people, and I liked my beige cubicle, and it was comfortable. But ultimately, it wasn't a home for me. So the layoff came. I felt in free fall, and you go through all the emotions of anger and and everything else. And
it's really top of mind for me right now. I have a good friend that just is going through it right now, and to sit across from this person and just see you can see the pain.
Yeah.
And to have this kind of conversation and be like, obviously it's a moment in time, and usually it kind of works out for the best. To your point, you can't say that when someone's in the middle of it.
That. But also, getting laid off gives you empathy for other people.
For sure.
And you know what they're going through. And it's not just a matter of, buck up, you can find another job. Because you go through a grieving process.
Yep.
It's sort of, the company that you worked for, they have in a way rejected you. Now, it might be financial from their point of view.
Yep.
We don't have enough demand to keep all these workers, but they're still saying you are no longer part of us. We are laying you off. That's emotional. That's some heavy stuff.
For sure.
It goes beyond just economics of a paycheck. It is kind of a rejection, and you go through a grief, especially if it's a job you liked.
For sure. So what was your move when you got laid off? How'd you? Do you remember length of time that you kind of either grieved for it, or did you push in a corner?
It was the first time actually when I got laid off CP Rail. I applied for employment insurance, or I think at that time it was still the unemployment insurance. Oh, yeah. I actually applied for it, but there's a delay time, and as it turned out, I never even ended up getting to collect a check because I found another job almost right away, and it was the job that changed everything for me, because I got a job. I'm still shocked, actually, that I got this job, but I got a job as an economist with the Bank of Canada. Every economist in the country, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but I mean, that is kind of the pinnacle. If you can get a job as an economist at the Bank of Canada, that's what everyone's striving to do. And I didn't have the best grades coming out of my master's. I certainly was not the brainiacs of monetary policy that they teach at Queen's University and Western. Those are the two big schools in Canada where the Bank of Canada likes to recruit.
Yep.
I was this okay student from the University of Calgary, but I got hired, and I was here in the Calgary regional office of the Bank of Canada. But I was in the research department. I mean, the Bank of Canada's main head office, Ottawa, but they have these 5 regional offices across the country. And I was in the Prairie regional office here in Calgary. And I got this job, and it really changed my life, only because it gave me a lot more credibility as an economist. I mean, that's the kind of resume stuff you want. To be a business analyst at CP Rail, that would really put you more kind of in the corporate business world.
Yep.
But if you can have on your resume, I was an economist at the Bank of Canada, that sets you up for a different profile of possible jobs. I couldn't believe I got the job then. That was 2001, because I was at the Bank of Canada when 9/11 happened. So it was 2001. I still, to this day, I can't believe that they hired me. Worked there for about 4 years. Worked with the smartest people that probably I'll ever have the honor of working with. Like, actually way too smart. Most of the time, I couldn't even understand. What are you guys even talking about? But I had a great experience there. But ultimately, I knew that in the long run, my future wasn't going to be with the Bank of Canada. It was one of those for a time, being. So I was there 4 years. The regional offices are small. There's only, maybe 8 or 10 people that work in them. The ultimate goal is to, put in your time in the regions, as they in Ottawa would call it.
Yep.
There was even one senior leader in Ottawa who brought all the regional people together. And he said, I can still remember, he goes, don't worry, we won't keep you in the regions forever. As if it was like a big penalty to be out in Calgary or Halifax. And I thought, I don't feel like I'm, Calgary is my home. Ottawa's not my home. Mm-hmm. So I never was really interested in, getting the promotion and moving to Ottawa and being. So I left there, quit. It was actually the first job I quit and never got laid off. So that was new. That was an experience, walking to my boss saying, I'm resigning. First time in my life.
Thank you.
I'm actually quitting a job. Yeah, not getting laid off. I went back to the Canada West Foundation for a short time, maybe about 3 years. I went back as the chief economist. So this is where I started my career, finishing my master's. Returned to the Canada West Foundation as chief economist, different president at the time, very different organization. Really great experience working there. And then in 2007, a company called ATB Financial kept calling and calling and calling me and saying, will you apply for this job as chief economist? And I kept telling them, no, I'm not interested. I've got a chief economist job. I'm not interested in working for what I would have at the time called the Treasury branch, because those of us who grew up in Alberta in the 70s
Totally.
and 80s, that's what you called it.
Yeah.
And and I didn't really have the right attitude. I thought, I don't want to work for the Treasury branch. That's for the farmers. Like, I'm not working there. But probably after 6 attempts and me saying, no, I'm not coming to work there, I eventually said, okay, let me talk to, and I started interviewing. I don't think they knew it at the time, but I said, I want to have lunch with all of the senior execs and kind of get a sense of what this company is all about and what they would want me to do. So long story short, after about 9 months from the first sort of contact with ATB until me finally taking the job, it was about 9 months. But in 2007, then I became the chief economist of ATB Financial. And that has been, without question, the best experience and the longest job I've ever held. So I was there about 16 and a half years and retired from that in August of 22.
And that's obviously when I start seeing you and hearing you because of that job. Your ability to speak and communicate, was that always like a natural thing, or was the ATB thing, did it kind of start pushing you in a direction that you had to figure out?
Yeah, I never thought of myself as a public speaker.
Yep.
I certainly wouldn't have seen myself as making a career of giving speeches and presentations and being in front of a podium and talking in front of a microphone.
Yep.
But I had done a couple when I was the chief economist at the Canada West Foundation, and that's where somebody at ATB noticed me.
Just your delivery, your tone,
My delivery,
your message.
I guess, yeah.
I mean,
I'd love to go back now as a fly on the wall and watch me present circa 2005 and see what I would have been like compared to today.
Yep.
But they saw that, hey, this guy, he's actually a really good communicator, and he's exactly what we need for an economist here at ATB. They didn't have an economist before me. But there was one man there who was originally my boss, Bob Aska is his name. And he thought ATB should have an economics department. We should have a chief economist. And he had seen me present and said, we need to get him. So eventually they did get me.
Yep.
And when I was at ATB, my original job description, in it, there were a bunch of things I was expected to do, forecasting and providing economic updates to senior managers or whoever, whatever.
Was it, sorry, before you keep going.
Yeah.
When you see obviously it took nine months to get you.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you had a clear picture of what you're going to do. Were you intimidated at all, or did you feel very confident that you could do well in the role?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back.
I know I'm making you work here. Sorry.
Yeah, there's always
nerves, obviously.
Yeah, there's always a little imposter syndrome for everybody, and I think a certain amount of that is natural and might even be healthy because it really helps sharpen what you're doing when you start a job and you think, I can't let anyone
Who's
know
watching?
I don't belong here. They've made a terrible mistake. It sharpens you, you know, and you know, I don't know if it's fake it till you make it or whatever it is, but I certainly did feel some of that imposter syndrome. But in my original job description, it said, you know, maybe 2 or 3 presentations a month. But as I got into the job, that was the thing that I was amazing at doing. And it ended up being more like 20 a month.
And when you say that, like you're amazing at it, a newfound talent, like something that was just there.
I guess, well, I mean, I started doing, for the first year or two, I started doing a lot of economic presentations. And then I had an epiphany moment, a night that, I mean, he'll never know that this happened, but a U.S. author and presenter by the name of Daniel Pink, some of your listeners will, he wrote A Whole New Mind, and he used to write speeches for Bill Clinton or whoever. But Alberta University of the Arts, at the time, I guess ACAD, brought him in as a speaker. And I attended this dinner at the Hyatt downtown, and here's Dan Pink, and he's going to give this presentation. And he got on stage, no notes or anything. He goes, tonight I'm going to show you 10 photos. Even better, they were all photos he had taken. And he walked through his entire book, A Whole New Mind, showing photos, 10 photos. There was no text, there were no charts or graphs, there was nothing. 10 photos, 10 personal stories, and he laid out his whole book. And I had this epiphany. I said, that's what I have to do. It really drove home to me the power of image and the power of story. So I went home and I scrapped all my charts and graphs in my PowerPoint presentation. I got rid of all of them. And I started presenting using just photos and mostly things, stock photos I'd buy online or whatever, some that I took myself, and story, and wove together an ability to talk about the economy using image and using story. Dude, and people just went wild. And I loved it. I felt, you know, and by this time I was already 41 years old. Yeah, but by that time I felt, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm finally in my groove here, doing, this is what I'm doing. It was an unconventional way for an economist to present. And I'm never going to be that technical economist. Other economists are really good at, you know, modeling and charts and graphs. And you always need data, 100%. But you also need people who can communicate it to non-economists. And even today, I'll have people that will come to me and say, I remember seeing you in a presentation in Grand Prairie in 2010 or whenever it was, and you had this great photo, or you explained the economy using children's toys. I had one like that, or television shows, and they still remember it. And you know, I'm always reminded how powerful a good image is and a good story. People will never forget it.
I got goosebumps when you as soon as you said story. I was like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, that's a powerful word.
And what's you know the name Peter Truzakian?
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
So I had Peter on the show.
Oh wow.
Of course he did. And so we talked about his perspective around storytelling and how he tells stories in his industry and how
he's
different.
He's a master at it too.
But very similar, right? He approached it from an image kind of graphic style around stories. Yeah. So as you're telling this, I'm like, oh my God, I've heard like.
Well, and Peter is a master, and he's been doing it longer than I had. And after I had, you know, sat in Dan Pink's presentation, I got to know Peter and got to go to some of his presentations. And Peter will never know this, but he too has been very influential on me as a public speaker because I'd watch Peter do this, and he's showing, here's an antique light bulb from 1922, and he'd walk through the energy transition using these images. And so he's been very influential on the way I present and the way I speak.
That moment when you figured out storytelling beside images, if you don't experience that, is it just you go down the path of like charts and graphs and the traditional? Did you have it in you though? Did you know that there was a different approach to this?
No, I did not know it. And you know, as I started doing it again, that epiphany with Dan Pink that night at the Hyatt, and when I started to do it, I just really felt the connection and how people were responding to this, and how I almost felt like I don't want to blow my horn too loud, but almost the superpower of connecting with an audience that I never knew I had before.
What'd you feel when you're on stage, when you knew that when you had connected? Was it quiet? Were you looking at eyes or smiling? What was it?
Oh, it is the connection with people, and especially when I start telling a story, because everyone leans in. You got to tell the story well. But the minute you say, I want to tell you a story, or even better yet, you just start telling a story, there are actual chemicals that, trigger in the brain. The neuroscience around this is pretty clear. We are hardwired to love stories. It's in our DNA. This is the way humans have connected since we started, falling out of the trees and started walking as Homo sapiens. Story has been the way we've transmitted history, our faith, our family stories, everything. It's all around stories. So when, as an economist, I get up and I start saying, in 1973, a high school student won a contest. People know this is a story. And they lean in. And again, you got to tell the story well, but you've got them. You've got every amount of their attention. And then you use the story to explain maybe a concept of adaptability, or which is a famous story that I love telling about. And that's the way it starts. In 1973, a high school student won a contest.
Well, how do you, storytelling is like fascinating to me because it's part of my business, what I really do besides this hobby. To be able to tell a good story, to go to that 1973 example.
Yeah.
What was your approach? Were you a very talented researcher? Did you just, what did you invest your time in to pull this off?
I don't know if I'm a particularly talented researcher. I mean, I love reading and I love observing what's going on around me. And the craziest story that I'll hear, or inspiration, and I'll find it in the most unusual places. And I'll say, that's it. That is the theme of my next presentation. The whole story about the high school student winning a contest, this all has to do with, I was in Innisfail, Alberta, of all places. Who would have thought? But I'm driving home from Edmonton one night, and a lot of listeners might know there's a McDonald's just off Highway 2 in Innisfail. I thought, I gotta go and eat something. I'm so hungry. So probably at 9 o'clock at night, there I am in the McDonald's in Innisfail, and there was a newspaper, I think it was The Sun or something. And I thought, well, I'm just going to flip through this newspaper. And there was a story, not a headline story, probably page 31, about NASA and some experiments they had with spiders at zero gravity at the International Space Station. They had taken up these spiders to see what will spiders do in zero gravity. And as it turns out, spiders build totally new designs of webs in zero gravity, because their web building technique here on Earth, where they lower themselves down, they use their body's weight, and they use the gravity of the Earth. The International Space Station, they don't have any gravity. So they built totally new designs of webs, and I thought, this is amazing. So I started doing some research around that story, and you can go on NASA's website, and it's all there. It started in 1973, a high school student in Connecticut. NASA, to their credit, they put out a contest. They said, we're looking for some good ideas, some good research that our engineers and astronauts can do at Space Lab at the time. So they put it out to high school students, which in itself is a genius move. You want some fresh ideas, ask people who aren't scientists. And so anyway, Judith Miles, she won the contest. She said, why don't you take spiders up to space? Because she was curious, just what would a spider do without gravity? So they said, that's the best idea we've ever heard. You win the top prize. And then in 1974, 2008, and finally in 2011, and I think they might still be doing some things, but the experiment in 2011 was the one I read about in Innisfail.
Wow.
So the story is about how do you adapt when your gravity is gone? And there's lots of lessons that I kind of teased out of the story about spiders. They knew they knew who they were. They are web builders. We just have to figure out, how do we build web in this environment that has changed on us? They didn't have to morph into some creature that they're not. So there's lots of lessons that I was able to kind of, and I wrote 2 books about it. But so that's where the inspiration came from, the Calgary Sun, at McDonald's and Innisfail. You just always have to be always aware of, because you don't know where the next really great, inspiring story is going to come from.
And once to connect the dot to create a story that you can use, are you able to get there quickly? Like, the adaptability piece, or do you have to sit with the story for a bit and then realize what's...
Usually it's pretty quick, but
Yeah.
then the longer I sit with it and let it steep, there's more kind of stories that come out of it. So to go back to the spiders at the International Space Station, the immediate and obvious lesson is about adaptability. How do you adapt when everything you thought you knew about your life has changed? Your gravity's gone. So the lesson is about adaptability, and we can learn from the spiders. But then the longer I kind of sit with the story, there's more and more lessons. For example, the spiders, they didn't get this right off the bat. When they crawled out of their containers at the space station, they were confused. They were lethargic. They just kind of floated around there for a little while. And for a while, it didn't look good for the spiders. But then after a period of time, they got busy and they started to teach themselves new techniques of pushing themselves off the edge of the container. But the lesson there is, when your gravity suddenly vanishes, give yourself a little space just to be confused.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself. You're not going to knock it out of the park the very next hour or the next day. Give yourself some space. Be kind to yourself and sort of just sit in that confusion for a while, because that's normal and it's probably part of the process, because that's what the spiders did. And I think, as humans, we're often pretty hard on ourselves. You get laid off. If you don't have a job by 10 a.m. tomorrow, you start to feel, bad about yourself and beat yourself up a bit.
Yep.
Give yourself a bit of space.
You're fascinating. This is like, I'm just like... It's for me, it's a bit of a mind twist, just like an economist become this like, and I'll use the word master storyteller. It seems like it's a very unique path.
Yeah.
I would never put those two side by side.
And most people won't, and it's, I think, only because of my economics background. Really, I think of myself more as a storyteller and a communicator than this world-renowned economist. I just happen to have a background in 30 years experience in understanding the economy.
Yep.
So now I can take my, true self as a storyteller and communicator, and I can tack on, and I'm going to help you understand what's going on in the economy.
Yeah.
Because 100%, there are economists, like even Peter Terzakian, like all of them, they would just run circles around me when you really get into the nuts and bolts of, especially mathematical economics. It's just not my thing. Remember, I dropped out of the Faculty of Math or Department of Math. So I should have really taken more, communications and maybe even storytelling in post-secondary, but I never did.
So what happens when you retire from ATB?
So I retired from ATB in August of 2022, and I sort of felt like you have to do this like Seinfeld. You have to do it when everyone is still shocked and sad you're leaving, and I think a lot of people were, and it was tough for me because, again, this was a great position.
Yeah.
I mean, and by this time they had made me a vice president, so I was kind of part of the executive team, and so I was VP and Chief Economist at a good-sized bank. That's a great title.
You were doing good.
I was doing good, and at age 55, I decided, no, I got to disrupt myself because like a lot of us during COVID, I think I had some space to sort of sit there in between jigsaw puzzles and making sourdough bread. We all had some time. Most of us had some time to sit and contemplate, what is life all about, and what does the next 15 years look like for me? So when COVID started to lift, I decided that, the next 15 years, I don't want it to look like the last 15 years. This has been a great career and a great run for me, and I never did feel frustrated or resentment in my job, but I could see it on the horizon, right? And when you can see it coming on the horizon, you've got to make a change until disappointment and resentment is on you. And then they're going to be showing you the door, right? And that's not the way anyone wants to leave a great career in a great company. So I decided it's time for me. Plus, realistically, it's good to make space for other people. There were other people in the group, and it's giving a brand new person, Mark Parsons, he replaced me at ATB. It's giving him a great opportunity to, fill that role for a while too.
Yeah.
So took the plunge, thought about it for about, 4 or 5 months, but then in June of 22, I announced I'm going to be leaving, and by the end of August, I was gone. So it was
Like life-changing.
It was life-changing, yeah.
Yeah.
And while I was going, people at ATP probably don't know this, but while I was sort of contemplating and planning my exit, I was sort of scheming, well, maybe there's a way I could keep one foot in the door. Maybe I could keep doing my podcast, which I did at ATB. Maybe I could volunteer. I'll still do ATB's podcast for them and, sort of keep myself relevant and connected that way. But ultimately, I thought, no, if I'm going to do this kind of has to be a hard break. So that's the way it was.
Did you, when you were thinking about the next 15 years, did you have a loose plan in your head of what you're going to execute on?
Well, it was now is my time. I'm really going to build myself out as a public speaker. So I made some connections. There's a group it's based in the States, but it's US and Canada. It's called Impact 11, and it's professional speakers. It's training and development for a community of about 150 professional speakers in North America. It's a great community. They do every quarter. They do sort of a speaker boot camp. Anyway, I've really kind of dived into that and expanding the profession of being a public speaker. And I always thought, my 15 years at ATB, I thought I was really good. Then I went off to my first boot camp. It must be the feeling that, to use a sports metaphor, and I'm not a sports guy, but, maybe for the top player of the Medicine Hat Tigers, I don't know what hockey league this is, he probably thinks he's a good player. And then he gets maybe one day to try out with the Flames or something like that, and he might realize, I'm not as good as I thought, or I'm good, but I've got a lot of growing and improving I can still do. That was my experience getting connected with this group, because I always thought, I'm a good speaker. People tell me this all the time. You go to Innisfail and people say, you're the best speaker I've ever heard. Well, that's in Innisfail. No disrespect to Innisfail, but not a lot of speakers come through. So now I am surrounding myself with some of the best speakers in the world. And even in the year I've been involved in it, I've improved as a public speaker. Now I'm looking for sort of the bigger audiences. Now I am, having to go. I work with a speaker bureau, but now I'm asking groups, you got to pay me money. The 15 years at ATB, I was free. ATB paid me a nice paycheck every 2 weeks, and I would basically go to any event that invited me, and I purred at no cost to the organizers. ATB would be the kind of the sponsor. Now I'm asking these groups for a lot of money for me to come out and speak, and some of them, they just don't have any fee for me. But I am working, like I said, with the Speaker Bureau, trying to get into some of the bigger markets and some of the bigger audiences.
What other ideas did you have when you were kind of looking at your next 15 years? What else was on your roadmap?
I don't know if I really had a whole lot.
Public speaking, like the keynote public speaker was your...
That was really the only thing that I wanted to do. I've written 4 books. I don't know if I have it in me to write more books.
When was the last time you published?
2021.
Okay.
There was a sequel to the original Spiders in Space book. That came out in 2017. I had a co-author with that one, so when I say we. And then we did another one in 2021, Spiders in COVID Space, sort of the sequel, to piece together or to profile some of the stories of great adapters during COVID specifically. But after having written 4 books, I don't know, I like writing books, but I don't have an idea at the moment. And I would hate to be, one of these Malcolm Gladwell people that write these great books. And then the minute, it's off the bestsellers list, then the publisher is, okay, what's the next idea? We need another book concept. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, people like Malcolm Gladwell, I'm sure, can do this, but I don't have another idea for a book. So another book, it might be. I might go home this afternoon and the idea will, creativity comes like a breeze of wind, and it might just hit me, and I might build out a whole idea for a book. but it might not. And I don't have to feel any pressure about writing another book or not.
You said something earlier when you were at ATB, the podcast.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had one because I don't do any research. But where did that idea come from, and why'd you pull it off?
The idea originally wasn't mine. It was part of the communications team at ATB, and this was probably it was before COVID. We started it before COVID because I remember my original guest we'd meet in person, and then COVID happened.
Yep.
But so probably around 2019, some of the people in the communications team at ATB at the time decided we should have a podcast. And it was a great idea. They built it out. It was called The Future Of. And every episode I would talk to some I think I also had Peter Terzakian on mine. He's on every one, right?
What is that? Sorry, we're going to keep going. But to my Peter experience, like he was one of the most intimidating people to come through this door because like he's a smart individual.
He is so smart.
So I'm. Listen, I can hold conversations, but I knew I just had to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
When you had him, like you've known him for a long time now, but you know that feeling of like, oh my God, this guy's gonna.
There is a lot of that for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because I've gotten to know Peter on a personal level too. Probably I can't remember, but the very first time I met Peter, it would have certainly been after he was already on the David Letterman show or. I think it was Letterman, and he had already written a bunch of books, and I had seen him present, and you know, I'm certain the very first time I got to meet him, I was just as intimidated. Now, at this point, I know him a bit more socially. Yep. He's had me on his podcast, so I'm not as intimidated by him anymore, but I certainly have an enormous amount of respect for the gray matter in that man's head, because he is wickedly smart.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, so I took you off your podcast.
So we started a podcast in 2019 called The Future Of, and we'd interview interesting guests, most of them in Alberta, but not all of them. And each episode we would dive into a different theme. So we might have the future of housing, or the future of banking, or the future of AI, or arts and culture, any number of things.
Yep.
But the focus was specifically on where is it going. So we'd have an interesting guest on to help us kind of unpack what's the future of art and culture, or what's the future of banking. So it was a lot of fun, and we did it over COVID. I had to record from my closet, which is the best sound in my house. So I'd set up my laptop in this little closet. It felt ridiculous, but sound was incredible. And we would do it over webinar, or over I forget what the platform was, but we did it online. So we did that for 3 years, and then it was. Because I really like doing it. It's a great marketing kind of thing, both for ATB, but also me personally.
Yep.
But when I left ATB, I also knew I've got to leave this podcast behind too.
Yep.
It was an ATB asset, and I believe they're still doing it. I think they are. It might be taking a bit of a different focus, maybe with their new chief economist. I don't know.
Yep.
But
would you ever spin up your own show?
I would love to. But at this point, I don't have some of the resources to do it. I mean, you've got this nice setup here. You also have some, you've got a bit of a team around you to help do it. I am a big believer that if you're going to do something, you got to do it really well. And I just don't have that resource around me at the moment. When I was at ATB, they had nice, there was Tia, she was the producer of it. So she would contact all the guests and set up everything.
Yep.
We hired Meg Wilcox, who is a prof at MRU. She did all the sound editing and made us sound amazing.
Cool.
So she did those kinds of things. Yep. And so the podcast was, in that sense, it was produced. At this point, I don't have the resources to really do that in the same way. But I'd be more likely, put it this way, I'd be more likely to come up with a podcast idea and figure that out than I would be to write another book. I think this is podcast.
Yep.
It's just the way people in 2023 are kind of connecting with information.
For sure.
And not as much reading. Although book sales, they say, are still climbing, but people like podcasts.
For sure. Especially the two different formats too, right? Video and the audio piece.
Yeah, for sure.
I got one selfish question before we put a bow on this. If I were as soon as you started talking about storytelling, I was like, oh my God. How would you recommend that I kind of further my knowledge and just kind of like refine my approach around storytelling? You're able to talk about it it's very concise and very like targeted. Your thoughts around story and storytelling and how you put it all together. Where'd that come from?
Well, one of the things I did was I studied the masters. So, I mean, there's no limit on YouTube or TED Talks. You know, watch the best storytellers in the world perform. Watch what they do. Or there's books you can buy about, how to tell a story. And this is part of what I learned as part of my training and development as a public speaker, this Impact 11 group. Everything from hand gestures to positioning on the stage, none of this is accidental. The masters do this. As part of the training, we watched Oprah Winfrey, actually, her acceptance speech. I think it was for The Color Purple. So this is going back a while. Mm-hmm. And we watched her give this speech, and we watched her tell this story of her 5-year-old self on this linoleum floor in her grandmother's house, watching Sidney Poitier win an Oscar in 1962. And she said, I had never seen somebody who looked like me standing there in a tuxedo holding an Oscar. And that changed everything for her. So she's a master storyteller. She's involved in the story, but the story's not about her. It's about Sidney Poitier. So we watched this video of her telling the story, everything from every hand gesture to facial expression. She is a master storyteller. This was not accidental. It was rehearsed. It doesn't come across as insincere or too polished. But she's a very good communicator that way. So to your original question, I mean, you can watch the best storytellers in the world tell stories, and think about stories in your past and bring yourself into the story. Don't make the story about you. You can be a character in the story, but think about what value does it bring to the listener? Can it change them? Can it inspire them in some way? I think that's really the art of storytelling. The impact it's going to have on the listener.
This one has been amazing.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this very much.
Yeah, it's just it's such a cool platform to get to meet somebody for the first time and to actually just like hear this firsthand, and then to hear, like I said 3 times, right? When you start talking about story, I'm like, oh man, this is this. A lot of things are going to come alive. So,
well, I think a lot of I describe in the economy and society, we're in this liminal space right now. We're in between one model of society and the economy that kind of died at the end of the 20th century, and something new is emerging. It has not yet emerged, but we're in this awkward space, the liminal space, where things feel uncomfortable, things feel tense. People are polarized on all kinds of issues. There's a lot of uncertainty in the economy and in society. But as we move through this liminal space, I'm a big believer that story is going to get us through this, because ultimately it is the connection we have as human beings. Yeah. I sort of build that out in my talk about the economy. The economy is really, at base, it's nothing more than humans connecting. And if we lose that connection, that's when the economy is going to go off the rails. So as we move through this liminal space, storytelling, the human connection, I think that's going to be more important than ever.
Are you, as you're speaking, like your next 10 months, is this kind of conversation part of your...
Yep.
Is this it?
A lot of it. I mean, usually in my presentations, we've gotten into great stories about my past, and I, usually talk about those things. Yeah. But I do talk about this liminal space that we're in, this space of this time of era of confusion, and everything is... The best way I can describe the liminal space, moving from one state to the other, is everyone's gone through puberty. It is a miserable time in life in a lot of ways, or people who've raised teenagers. There's weird emotions and smells and a lot of hormones, and because you're changing. Your childhood self is no longer, it's gone. But you've not yet emerged into adulthood. You're moving from one space to the other. So I'll talk about that exact example in my talks on the economy. Cool. Why does everything feel so unsettled right now? Why is everyone so anxious and in some ways, combative and we're polarized, and we go, and I'm just as bad. We go straight to 10, in debates about whatever it was, COVID, all of these things. We're in a liminal space. We will get through this. We don't know what will emerge at the end of it. It will look different. It hasn't yet arrived, but again, the only way we're going to successfully move into this new state and have some economy or some society left is if we really emphasize the human connections and storytelling.
Man, I could sit here for another hour and talk about that. But what I'm angling towards, I'm going to try and sneak into one of your like places that I'm not supposed to be to hear this, because it sounds like to connect those dots around story.
Yeah,
it's way different.
Yeah,
like it's such a interesting approach that makes so much sense to me.
Well, and the other thing I do is I kind of keep a roster of about 30 stories that I can kind of pull off the shelf at any, I might be presenting or I might be on a podcast and I can tell a story about, the invention of whatever it is. And it's just like Peter Terzaki can do.
Amazing. I end the show with one question.
Okay.
When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
Oh, I love Calgary. I mean, it's sort of like family members, it can be a love-hate relationship at times, but I live here. This is my home. I get sometimes frustrated, again, like you would get frustrated with your brother, but you're always going to know where your brother is. You're always going to love your brother. Most people do. I love my brother. He drives me crazy sometimes, but that's my relationship with Calgary. This is my home. This is where I'm going to build my career. My partner and I were not leaving Calgary. There are some things that, do frustrate me, but most of all, I'm just so proud of the spirit. I've often early on we talked about me being the accidental Calgarian. And I've described myself over 34 years as being, and I say this affectionately, trapped with opportunity in this city. 2 layoffs, we talked about that, was really awful. Many different jobs, 5 major recessions, and that's the economist to me talking. 5 major recessions, and probably some smaller ones mixed in there. But in every recession, in every layoff, this city is always full of opportunity. If you're willing to work hard, and if you're willing to get involved and be positive-minded. This city, they don't care about your last name or what prep school you did or did not go to or who your dad is or, Other cities, that's not the case.
Yep.
Those connections or that background is maybe more important. In Calgary, I arrived here and have built a wonderful life and a wonderful career. I don't come from a pedigree of, of really anything. But that's what I love about this city, and that's what I think about. That's a long way to answer the question, what do I think about when I think of Calgary? But it's really opportunity.
Another fantastic answer. You're just like, yeah, man, this has been, I've said it already, but thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Yep, thank you.